The September wind carried the smell of diesel and dry grass across Route 66, where it cut through Baxter Springs like a scar that never quite healed. At Hal's service station, 2 bays, 1 working lift, and a Coca-Cola sign so faded it looked pink, the afternoon sun made the concrete shimmer. A single motorcycle sat tilted on its kickstand near the air pump, its chrome catching light like a warning. Cody Weaver didn't notice the bike at first. He was focused on the sidewalk, on the rhythm he'd perfected over 9 years of living in a body that didn't work the way other kids' bodies worked. Left crutch, right foot, right crutch, left foot. The leg braces made a soft click with each step, a sound his mother said reminded her of a pocket watch. He liked that. It made him feel like he was keeping time for the whole town. He was walking home from the bus stop, the same route he took every day. Past the Dollar General, past the boarded-up gift shop, past Hal's. His backpack was too heavy, library books, always library books, and it pulled at his shoulders in a way that made his arms ache by the time he reached the mobile home park. But he never complained. Complaining meant his mom would worry, and his mom worried enough already. The man was crouched beside the motorcycle when Cody first saw him. Big, broad, with a leather vest that had patches Cody didn't recognize, but understood instinctively meant something serious. The man's hands were covered in grease, and he was cursing softly at a saddlebag that had come unlatched. Tools lay scattered across the oil-stained concrete. Wrenches, a socket set, screwdrivers fanned out like pickup sticks. Cody stopped. He knew he should keep walking. His mother had told him 100 times not to talk to strangers, and this stranger looked like the kind of man other people crossed the street to avoid. But the man's hands were shaking. Not a lot, not in a way most people would notice, but Cody noticed everything. It was what happened when you spent most of your life sitting still while the world moved around you. The man reached for a wrench and knocked over the socket set. More pieces scattered, rolling under the bike, pinging against the concrete. He swore again, louder this time, and Cody saw something in his face that surprised him. It wasn't anger, it was embarrassment. The kind of embarrassment that comes when your body won't do what you need it to do. Cody understood that better than most. He made his way over before he could talk himself out of it. The click of his braces on the concrete made the man look up, and for a moment, they just stared at each other. The 9-year-old boy with the crooked legs and the 54-year-old biker with the shaking hands. "You dropped your stuff," Cody said. It wasn't eloquent, but it was true. The man's eyes went to the crutches, then back to Cody's face. "I can see that. I can help." "Kid, I don't need..." But Cody was already lowering himself down, bracing one crutch against the bike's rear tire for balance. It wasn't graceful. It was never graceful. But he'd learned a long time ago that graceful didn't matter if you got the job done. He picked up a wrench, then a screwdriver, then reached under the bike for a socket that had rolled into shadow. The man watched him. Didn't say a word. Just watched as this small boy with the leg braces and the too heavy backpack gathered up his tools one by one and placed them back in the saddlebag with careful precision. It took maybe 3 minutes. When Cody finished, he pulled himself back up, using the crutch in the bike's seat, breathing hard but trying not to show it. "There," he said. "They're all there. I counted." The man looked at the saddlebag, then back at Cody. His expression was unreadable behind the gray beard and the weathered skin. "You counted. 12 wrenches, 8 sockets, 4 screwdrivers, 1 ratchet, and a thing I don't know the name of, but it looks like a metal hook." "Brake spring tool." "Okay, 1 brake spring tool." The man was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a $20 bill. "Here." Cody shook his head. "I didn't do it for money." "Then why'd you do it?" The question seemed to genuinely confuse the man, and that confused Cody in return. Wasn't it obvious? "Because you needed help," he said. "And I was here." Something shifted in the man's face. It was small, just a flicker, but Cody saw it. The same way he saw the shaking hands and the embarrassment, and the way the man's eyes had gone soft for just a second, when Cody had struggled to stand back up. "What's your name, kid?" "Cody. Cody Weaver." The man nodded slowly like he was filing the name away somewhere important. "I'm Dale. Most people call me Wrench." "Because you're good with tools?" "Something like that." Dale tucked the 20 back in his pocket. He didn't offer it again. Instead, he pulled out a small white chip, looked at it for a moment, then put it away. "You live around here, Cody Weaver?" Willowbrook, the mobile home park up on Cypress. Your folks know you stopped to help strangers on the highway? My mom works nights. She's sleeping now. Cody shifted his weight on the crutches. I should go. I have homework. Dale nodded. He swung one leg over the bike and settled into the seat, but he didn't start the engine. He just sat there, watching as Cody began his slow, clicking walk toward home. Hey, kid. Cody turned. You ever need anything, you find a way to let me know. Dale's voice was gruff, but there was something underneath it that sounded almost like a promise. I don't forget people who help me, understand? Cody didn't understand, not really, but he nodded anyway. The Harley roared to life, and Dale pulled out onto Route 66, heading north toward Joplin. Cody watched until the bike was just a speck of chrome and thunder, then continued his walk home. The wind had picked up, carrying the smell of someone's backyard grill, and the late afternoon light turned the trailer park sign to gold. He didn't tell his mom about the man with the shaking hands. She had enough to worry about. But that night, lying in bed with his braces propped against the wall, Cody thought about the way Dale had looked at him when he'd said he didn't want money, like Cody had said something in a language Dale had forgotten how to speak. 3 days later, the eviction notice appeared on their door. Denise Weaver found the notice when she came home from her shift at 6 a.m, her scrubs still smelling of disinfectant and the particular exhaustion that comes from 12 hours of lifting patients who can no longer lift themselves. The paper was taped to the door at eye level, as if Ray Puckett wanted to make sure she couldn't miss it. 14 days to vacate. Code violations, unsafe structure. The words blurred together in the gray light of dawn. She didn't cry. She was too tired to cry. Instead, she pulled the notice down, folded it into her pocket, and went inside to make sure Cody was still asleep before she allowed herself to sit at the kitchen table and stare at the wall. The trailer wasn't much. She knew that. The linoleum was peeling in the bathroom, and the back window had been sealed with plastic sheeting since last winter. But it was theirs. She'd moved here with Cody when he was 4, after the divorce, after the surgeries, after the insurance money ran out, and the only job she could find was 40 minutes away in Galena. 5 years of night shifts, 5 years of meal planning down to the dollar, 5 years of telling Cody that things would get better, that they just had to hold on a little longer. And now, Ray Puckett wanted them gone. She knew why. Everyone in Willowbrook knew why. Ray's brother-in-law had lost his job in Tulsa and needed a place to stay. The double-wide on Lot 14, their double-wide, was the biggest unit in the park. Prime real estate, if you could call anything in Willowbrook prime. Ray had been finding reasons to raise their lot rent for 2 years now. First it was the maintenance fee, then the utility adjustment. Now it was code violations that hadn't existed, until Ray decided they did. Denise pulled the notice from her pocket and read it again. The violations were listed in neat typed rows: damaged skirting, improper electrical panel, structural compromise to rear deck. She almost laughed. The rear deck was 3 wooden steps that Ray himself had built when he was trying to get on her good side, back when Cody was 6, and Ray thought a single mother might be lonely enough to be grateful for his attention. She'd said no. Politely at first, then firmly. Ray hadn't forgotten. Cody's door creaked open at 7:30, the familiar click of his braces announcing him before he appeared in the hallway. He was wearing his school clothes already, his backpack slung over one shoulder in a way that made her wince. She'd told him 100 times to use both straps, but he said it made him look like a little kid. "Morning, Mom." He stopped when he saw her face. "What's wrong?" "Nothing, baby. Just tired." He didn't believe her. She could see it in the way his eyes moved to the table, to her hands, to the folded paper she hadn't quite hidden, but he didn't push. That was Cody. He noticed everything and said almost nothing, carrying observations around like stones in his pockets. "I made coffee," she said. "You want some toast before the bus? I can make it. Cody, let me—" "Mom." He was already moving toward the kitchen, his crutches finding their rhythm on the worn floor. "You just worked all night. Sit down." She sat. She watched her 9-year-old son navigate the narrow kitchen, pulling bread from the cabinet, working the toaster with practiced efficiency. He moved slower than other kids, but he moved with purpose, every motion considered, every step deliberate. She thought about all the surgeries, all the physical therapy appointments, all the nights she'd sat beside his hospital bed and promised him that his life would be full, that his body didn't define him, that he could do anything he set his mind to. She hadn't promised him they'd always have a home. The bus came at 8:15. Denise stood at the window and watched Cody make his way down the gravel drive, his backpack too heavy, his gait steady and sure. The driver, an older woman named Pat, who'd been running the route for 20 years, waited with the patience of someone who understood that not all children moved at the same speed. When the bus pulled away, Denise let herself cry, just for a minute. Then she wiped her face, poured another cup of coffee, and started making phone calls. The legal aid office in Joplin had a 6-week waiting list. The housing authority said there was nothing they could do about a private landlord. Pastor Jim at First Baptist listened to her whole story, then offered to pray with her and suggested she speak with the church's benevolence fund, which could maybe help with 1 month's rent but couldn't fight an eviction. Sherry at the diner said she'd heard Ray was doing the same thing to the Hendersons on Lot 9, but the Hendersons had family in Arkansas and were already packing. By noon, Denise had run out of numbers to call. She sat at the kitchen table with the notice spread flat in front of her, reading the same sentences over and over. 14 days, 2 weeks to find a new place, a new school for Cody, a new life built from the wreckage of the old one. She was still sitting there when the knock came. Ray Puckett stood on her steps, his polo shirt tucked into khakis that were too tight, his smile the kind that never reached his eyes. He was holding a clipboard, because Ray always held a clipboard. It made him feel official. "Denise." He said her name like they were old friends. "Just wanted to check in, make sure you got the notice." "I got it." "Good, good." He made a show of looking at his clipboard. "Hate to do this, you know, but rules are rules. County inspector's been on my case about safety standards. Got to think about liability." "There's no county inspector, Ray." His smile flickered. "Excuse me?" "I called the county this morning. They haven't had an inspector out here in 3 years, and even if they had, none of those violations are grounds for eviction, not under Kansas law." Ray's jaw tightened. For a moment, something ugly moved behind his eyes. Then the smile came back, wider now, more deliberate. "Well, I'm not a lawyer, Denise. Neither are you. But I do know my property, and I know what's safe and what isn't. That deck out back is a hazard. Your boy uses those steps every day." He paused, letting the words settle. Wouldn't want anything to happen to him. The threat was so casual, so wrapped in concern, that it took Denise a moment to recognize it. When she did, something cold moved through her chest. "Get off my porch, Ray!" "Now, Denise," I said, "get off." He held up his hands in mock surrender, still smiling. 14 days. I'd start packing if I were you." She watched him walk away, his clipboard tucked under his arm, his stride unhurried. He stopped at the end of the gravel drive and looked back at her, just for a second. Then he was gone. That night, Cody came home from school with a bruise on his forearm. He said he'd fallen on the playground, that it was nothing, that she shouldn't worry. But Denise saw the way he wouldn't meet her eyes, and she knew. Tyler Puckett was in Cody's grade, Ray's nephew. The apple hadn't fallen far. She made dinner, boxed mac and cheese, the kind Cody liked, and they ate in silence. Afterward, she helped him with his homework, quizzed him on spelling words, listened to him read aloud from a library book about the Apollo missions. Normal things, routine things, the rituals that held their small life together. When Cody was in bed, Denise sat on the back steps, the ones Ray said were a hazard, and looked up at the stars. The September air was cooling, carrying the first hints of autumn. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. A truck rumbled down Route 66, its headlights briefly illuminating the tree line, before fading into darkness. She thought about her options. She could fight, but fighting cost money she didn't have. She could run, but running meant pulling Cody out of school, away from the only home he remembered, away from the routines that kept him steady. She could beg, but Ray wasn't the kind of man who responded to begging. He was the kind who fed on it. 14 days. The number sat in her chest like a stone. She didn't know that 20 miles north, in a garage on the outskirts of Joplin, a man named Dale Holcomb was thinking about a boy who had helped him pick up his tools. She didn't know that Dale had asked around, quietly, about the family in Lot 14 at Willowbrook. She didn't know that sometimes the help you need comes from the last place you'd think to look. All she knew was that tomorrow she had to work another 12-hour shift, and the day after that, and the day after that. And somehow, in between, she had to figure out how to save her son's home. The stars offered no answers. They never did. But Denise stayed on the steps a while longer anyway, watching the sky, waiting for something she couldn't name. Dale Holcomb sat in the back booth at Sherry's diner, nursing a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. The lunch rush had come and gone, leaving behind the quiet clatter of dishes being cleared and the low murmur of the television mounted above the counter. He wasn't watching it. He was watching the door. He'd been asking questions for 3 days now, quietly, the way he'd learned to do things over 40 years, of living on the margins of polite society. A word here, a name there. People talked to him more easily than they talked to cops or social workers. Something about the vest, the tattoos, the gray in his beard. It told them he wasn't going to judge. He'd seen too much for that. What he'd learned about Ray Puckett made his hands tighten around the coffee cup. The diner's owner, Sherry Dawson, slid into the booth across from him without asking. She was a sturdy woman in her late 50s, with reading glasses pushed up into her hair and a dish towel perpetually slung over her shoulder. She'd known Dale for 15 years, ever since he'd started stopping in on rides down from Joplin. She didn't ask about club business, and he didn't offer. That was how it worked. "You're still here," she said. It wasn't a question. Still here. "That boy you asked about, the Weaver kid." Sherry glanced toward the kitchen, then back at Dale. His mama was in yesterday. Looked like she hadn't slept in a week. "She working nights at the nursing home?" "Double shifts, from what I hear. Trying to save up for a lawyer, but there's no saving fast enough when you're making $12 an hour." Sherry shook her head. "Ray Puckett's been circling that family like a vulture. Everyone knows it. Nobody does anything." Dale turned the coffee cup in his hands. "Why not?" "Because Ray's cousin is on the city council. Because his brother-in-law used to be a deputy before he got fired for drinking on the job. Because people in this town learned a long time ago that crossing the Pucketts means your car gets keyed, your dog goes missing, your kids get picked on at school." She leaned back. "It's not dramatic, Dale. It's just slow, grinding. The kind of mean that wears you down until you stop fighting." "The boy," Dale said. "Cody, he getting picked on?" Sherry was quiet for a moment. "Tyler Puckett's in his class, Ray's nephew. I've seen that kid come into the diner with his uncle, and I've seen the way he looks at people, like they're beneath him." She met Dale's eyes. "Cody came in last week with a bruise on his arm, said he fell." Dale's jaw tightened. He thought about the boy at the gas station, the careful way he'd lowered himself to the ground, the matter-of-fact tone when he'd counted off the tools. 12 wrenches, 8 sockets, 4 screwdrivers. The kid had dignity, the kind you couldn't teach, only born with or beaten into you. "How many days they got left?" 11, I think, maybe 10. Sherry stood, smoothing her apron. "I don't know what you're thinking, Dale, but whatever it is, that family could use a miracle right about now." She walked back to the counter, and Dale sat alone with his cold coffee and the weight of a decision he'd already made. That evening, he rode back to Joplin. The clubhouse sat on the edge of town, a converted warehouse with a gravel lot and a row of bikes parked out front like sleeping animals. Inside, the air smelled of motor oil and cigarette smoke, and the particular mustiness of a place where men gathered to be understood without explanation. Dale found Marcus Deacon Webb in the back office, hunched over a ledger book with reading glasses perched on his nose. Deacon was the chapter president, a lean black man in his early 60s, with a voice like gravel and a reputation for fairness that extended well beyond the club. He'd served 2 tours in Vietnam, come home to a country that didn't want him, and found his family among men who judged you by your word and your ride, nothing else. "Wrench." Deacon didn't look up. "Heard you've been spending time down in Baxter Springs." "You heard right." "Also heard you've been asking about some trouble at a trailer park." Now he looked up, his eyes sharp behind the glasses. "You want to tell me what this is about?" Dale sat down across from him. He told the story from the beginning. The gas station, the scattered tools, the boy who helped him without being asked and refused money for it. He told Deacon about the shaking in his hands, early Parkinson's, the doctor said, nothing to do but watch it get worse, and how the boy had seen it and said nothing, just got down on the ground and did what needed doing. Then he told him about Ray Puckett, the eviction notice, the threats, the nephew who'd put a bruise on a disabled kid's arm. When he finished, Deacon was quiet for a long moment. He took off his glasses, rubbed the bridge of his nose, and set them on the desk. "This isn't club business, Dale." "I know. We start getting involved in every small-town landlord dispute, we'll never stop." "I know that too." Deacon studied him. "But you're asking anyway." Dale reached into his vest pocket and pulled out the white chip. 6 years sober. He set it on the desk between them, not as payment, but as explanation. "I had a son," he said. "You know that. What you don't know is that I wasn't there for him, not when it mattered. I was on the road, or I was drunk, or I was so wrapped up in my own garbage that I couldn't see he was drowning." He paused. "By the time I got clean, it was too late. He'd been gone 2 years. Deacon said nothing. He waited. "That boy in Baxter Springs," Dale continued, "he's got the same look my son had, like he's carrying something too heavy, and he's decided not to complain about it. Like he's figured out the world isn't fair, and he's just going to keep moving anyway." He picked up the chip, turned it over in his fingers. "I can't go back and save my son, but I can make sure this kid doesn't lose his home because some petty tyrant decided to make his mother's life hell." The silence stretched. Somewhere in the clubhouse, a door slammed. Laughter echoed down the hall. Finally, Deacon leaned back in his chair. "What are you thinking?" "Nothing illegal, nothing that gives Puckett ammunition." Dale met his eyes. "But I want to show up. I want him to see that this family isn't alone. Sometimes that's enough." "And if it isn't?" "Then we figure out the next step." Deacon picked up his glasses, turned them over in his hands. "How many you need?" "As many as are willing." Another long pause. Then Deacon nodded just once. "I'll make some calls, but this stays clean, you understand? No threats, no damage, no giving the law a reason to come down on us." "Understood." "And Dale." Deacon's voice softened. "That boy's lucky you stopped at that gas station." Dale shook his head. "I'm the lucky one. I just didn't know it yet." He rode back to Baxter Springs that night, the September air cool against his face, the stars scattered overhead like salt on black cloth. Somewhere in Willowbrook, a woman was lying awake, counting the days she had left. Somewhere, a boy was sleeping with his braces propped against the wall, dreaming of things he'd never ask for out loud. Dale didn't know if what he was planning would work. He didn't know if showing up would change anything, or if Ray Puckett would just wait them out and strike again once the bikes were gone. But he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't going to let that boy wake up believing that kindness was a weakness, that helping a stranger earned you nothing but silence in return. The road stretched out before him, dark and certain. In 4 days he'd be back, and he wouldn't be alone. The morning of the 10th day broke gray and cold, the kind of Kansas autumn morning that couldn't decide if it wanted to rain or just threaten. Denise had worked the night shift again, and she was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee she hadn't touched when she heard it. At first, she thought it was thunder, a low rumble in the distance rolling across the fields like a storm front moving in. But the sound didn't fade. It grew, deeper, fuller, until the windows began to vibrate in their frames, and the coffee in her cup trembled like something alive. She went to the window. They came down Cypress Road in a column, 2 by 2, their headlights cutting through the morning mist. She counted 10, then 20, then lost track as more kept appearing over the rise. The sound was enormous now, a wall of noise that pressed against the trailer and made the plates rattle in the cupboard. Harley-Davidsons, most of them. A few other makes she didn't recognize, all of them ridden by men in leather vests, their faces set with the kind of quiet purpose that made her stomach drop. Denise's first thought was that Ray had called in some kind of threat, that these men were here to finish what the eviction notice had started. She was already reaching for her phone when the lead bike turned into her gravel drive and stopped. The rider was older, broad-shouldered, with a gray beard and hands that gripped the handlebars like he'd been born holding them. He killed the engine, and the bikes behind him followed suit, one by one, until the only sound was the ticking of cooling metal and the distant call of a crow. The man dismounted. He walked toward her porch with a slow, deliberate gait, and Denise realized she was holding her breath. Behind him, the other riders stayed on their bikes, watching, waiting. He stopped at the bottom of her steps. Mrs. Weaver? Who's asking? Name's Dale. Most people call me Wrench. He glanced back at the column of bikes, then returned his gaze to her. Your son helped me out a couple weeks back. I told him if he ever needed anything, I'd find a way to return the favor. Denise stared at him. Cody helped you? Yes, ma'am. Picked up my tools when I dropped them. Wouldn't take a dime for it. A faint smile crossed his weathered face. He said he did it because I needed help, and he was there. Stuck with me, those words. The door behind Denise creaked open, and Cody appeared in the frame, his crutches clicking softly on the threshold. His eyes went wide when he saw the bikes, then wider when he recognized the man at the bottom of the steps. Dale. Hey, kid. Dale's voice softened. Told you I don't forget. Cody looked at the line of motorcycles stretching back down the road. Are all these people here for us? They're here because you did something good, and good ought to be answered. Dale reached into his vest and pulled out a folded piece of paper. We heard about your situation, the eviction, the man giving your family trouble. He held out the paper to Denise. This is a list of every code violation Ray Puckett has on his own properties. His rental house on Oak Street, the storage units behind the feed store, the trailer he keeps his brother-in-law in, which isn't even zoned residential. Denise took the paper. Her hands were shaking. We also talked to a lawyer in Joplin, Dale continued. Friend of the club. She says the eviction notice isn't worth the paper it's printed on. Puckett didn't follow proper procedure, didn't give adequate notice, and half those violations he cited don't exist. She's willing to take your case pro bono. He paused. If you want her to. Denise opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out. She looked at the paper in her hands, then at Dale, then at the rows of bikers sitting silent in the morning mist. Why? She finally managed. You don't even know us. Dale glanced at Cody, then back at her. I knew a boy once who needed help and didn't get it. By the time I figured out what mattered, he was gone. His voice was steady, but there was something underneath it that Denise recognized, the sound of a wound that hadn't healed. Your son reminded me of him, not because they're alike, but because Cody's the kind of kid who deserves to grow up believing that kindness counts for something, that when you help a stranger, it comes back around. A truck appeared at the end of the road, moving slowly past the line of bikes. It pulled into the drive and parked beside the trailer, and Denise saw Sherry Dawson climb out of the cab, carrying a casserole dish covered in foil. Brought breakfast? Sherry called. Figured you could use it. She looked at the bikers and shook her head with something like wonder. Pastor Jim's on his way too. And the Hendersons, turns out they're not leaving after all. Ray tried the same thing on them, and they're ready to fight back now that they know they're not alone. More cars began to appear. A pickup truck with a faded American flag sticker on the bumper, a minivan with a car seat visible through the back window, an old Buick that Denise recognized as belonging to Mrs. Tillman, who taught Sunday school and had never spoken more than 10 words to her in 5 years. They parked along the road, in the grass, wherever they could find space among the motorcycles. People got out. They carried food, blankets, folding chairs. One man had a toolbox. Another had a stack of lumber in his truck bed. They gathered in the yard, talking quietly among themselves, glancing at the bikers with expressions that ranged from cautious to curious to something that looked almost like hope. Ray Puckett's truck appeared at the end of Cypress Road at 9:30. He slowed when he saw the bikes, stopped completely when he saw the crowd. For a long moment, he just sat there, his engine idling, his face visible through the windshield. Even from a distance, Denise could see the calculation happening behind his eyes. Dale walked to the edge of the driveway. He didn't block the road. He didn't make any threatening gestures. He just stood there, arms folded, watching. The other bikers didn't move. They didn't need to. Their presence was enough. 40 men on 40 machines, silent as a jury. Ray's truck sat idling for what felt like a full minute. Then slowly, he put it in reverse. He backed up to the intersection, turned around, and drove away. A cheer went up from the crowd. Someone clapped, but Dale didn't celebrate. He just watched the truck disappear down the road, his expression thoughtful. He'll be back, he said to Denise. Men like that don't give up easy. I know. But now you've got people, you've got a lawyer, and you've got our number. He handed her a card with nothing on it but a phone number, handwritten in blue ink. Anything happens, you call, day or night. Denise looked at the card, then at Dale. I don't know how to thank you. Don't thank me. Thank your son. Dale turned and looked at Cody, who was standing on the porch with his crutches, watching everything with those quiet, observant eyes. He's the one who started this. All I did was answer. Cody didn't say anything, but something shifted in his face, a loosening, like a knot finally coming undone. He'd spent his whole life being the one who needed help, the one people made accommodations for, spoke softly around, treated gently. And now, for the first time, he was seeing what his help had meant to someone else. Dale walked back to his bike. He swung one leg over, settled into the seat, and looked back at the trailer one more time. The morning sun had broken through the clouds, and it caught the chrome of 40 motorcycles, turning the whole yard into a field of light. "Hey, Cody," he called. Cody looked up. "You ever want to learn about engines, you come find me in Joplin. I'll teach you everything I know." He paused. "Might take a while. I know a lot." Cody smiled. It was small, barely there, but it was real. "Okay." Dale nodded. Then he started his engine and the others followed, the sound rising like a wave. They pulled out one by one, each rider lifting a hand to Denise and Cody as they passed. The thunder rolled back down Cypress Road, fading slowly into the distance until all that remained was the echo and the memory. Denise stood in her yard, surrounded by neighbors she barely knew, holding a casserole dish and a lawyer's phone number and a card with nothing but 7 handwritten digits. Cody stood beside her, his braces glinting in the sun. "Mom," he said quietly. "Yeah, baby?" "I think things are going to be okay." She put her arm around his shoulders, careful not to unbalance him, and pulled him close. "Yeah," she said. "I think so, too." 6 months later, the dogwoods were blooming along Route 66, their white petals catching the spring breeze like confetti from a parade that never ended. Baxter Springs had shaken off the gray of winter, and the town looked different now, or maybe it was just that people were looking at it differently. The eviction case had been dismissed in November. The lawyer from Joplin, a sharp-eyed woman named Carolyn Vance, had taken one look at Ray Puckett's paperwork and torn it apart in front of a county judge who seemed almost grateful for the excuse to rule against him. Ray had stood in that courtroom with his clipboard and his too tight khakis, and for once, his smile hadn't been able to save him. He still managed Willowbrook, but things had changed. The county had finally sent an inspector, a real one, and Ray's own properties had racked up enough violations to keep him busy for months. He didn't bother the Weavers anymore. He didn't bother anyone, really. He just kept his head down and did his job, and if there was resentment simmering behind his eyes, he'd learn to keep it there. Denise had cut back to single shifts. The lawyer had helped her apply for assistance programs she hadn't known existed, and Pastor Jim's church had quietly covered 3 months of lot rent while she got back on her feet. She still worked hard, she didn't know any other way, but now she was home when Cody got off the bus, and they ate dinner together at the kitchen table, instead of leaving plates wrapped in foil on the counter. Cody had grown 2 inches since September. His physical therapist said he was ahead of schedule on his strength goals, and his teacher had sent home a note saying he'd been selected for the district science fair. He was building a model engine, something he'd been researching for months. Denise didn't understand half of what he explained to her, but she understood the light in his eyes when he talked about it. On Saturdays, when the weather was good, a familiar Harley would roll into Willowbrook and park beside their trailer. Dale would knock on the door, and Cody would already have his jacket on, ready to ride up to Joplin. Denise had been nervous the first time, her 9-year-old on the back of a motorcycle, holding on to a man she barely knew. But Dale had shown her the extra helmet he'd bought, sized for a child, and the way he'd rigged a backrest so Cody could ride without straining his balance. He'd thought of everything. He always did. They'd spend the afternoon in Dale's garage, surrounded by engine parts and the smell of oil and metal. Dale would explain how things worked, carburetors, timing chains, the physics of combustion, and Cody would listen with the same quiet focus he brought to everything. Sometimes they'd work on a project together. Sometimes they'd just sit and talk. Dale told him about the places he'd ridden, the people he'd met, the mistakes he'd made when he was young and thought he was invincible. He told him about his son, too. Not all at once, but in pieces. The way hard truths come out when you're working with your hands and don't have to look each other in the eye. Cody learned about a boy named Kevin, who'd loved motorcycles and hated school, who'd fallen in with the wrong people and couldn't find his way back. He learned about the years Dale had spent trying to numb the guilt with whiskey, and the morning he'd woken up in a ditch outside Tulsa and decided he was done dying slowly. "You can't fix everything," Dale told him once, his hands steady on a wrench despite the tremor that lived in them now. "Some things break and stay broken, but that doesn't mean you stop trying to fix what you can." Cody thought about that a lot. He thought about his own body, the surgeries and the braces, and the way other kids looked at him sometimes, like he was a problem to be solved or avoided. He thought about his mom, who had carried their family on her back for years without complaint. He thought about the morning the bikers had come, the sound of 40 engines filling the yard, and the way Ray Puckett's truck had backed slowly away. He was starting to understand something. Strength wasn't about what your body could do. It was about what you did with whatever you had. The first Saturday in April, Dale arrived with a passenger. Deacon Webb rode his own bike, a vintage electric glide he'd owned for 30 years, and he parked it next to Dale's in the gravel drive. Cody had heard about Deacon but never met him, and he felt suddenly nervous as the tall, lean man dismounted and walked toward the porch. Deacon studied him for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then he reached into his vest and pulled out a small leather pouch. "Dale tells me you're building an engine for the science fair," he said. "Yes, sir." "He also tells me you're the reason 40 men rode down here last fall to help your family." Cody shook his head. "I just picked up some tools, that's all." Deacon smiled. It was a slow smile, the kind that had seen enough of the world to know what mattered. "That's never all." He handed Cody the pouch. "This belonged to my father. He was a mechanic in the army back in Korea. Fixed trucks, tanks, anything with an engine. He gave this to me when I was about your age, told me to keep it until I found someone who understood that helping people is its own reward." Cody opened the pouch. Inside was a small wrench, old and worn, its handle wrapped in electrical tape that had faded to gray. "It's not worth much," Deacon said, "but it's carried a lot of miles. I figure it's ready for some new ones." Cody looked up at him, then at Dale, then back at the wrench in his hands. He didn't know what to say, so he said the only thing that felt true. "Thank you, I'll take care of it." Deacon nodded. "I know you will." They stayed for dinner that night. Denise made pot roast, the good kind she only made on special occasions, and the four of them sat around the small kitchen table while the evening light turned golden through the window. They talked about engines and road trips and the best diners between Kansas City and Amarillo. They laughed about things that weren't particularly funny, but felt good to laugh about anyway. When Dale and Deacon finally left, their bikes rumbling off into the twilight, Cody stood on the porch and watched until the taillights disappeared. His mother came up behind him and rested her hand on his shoulder. "You okay?" "Yeah." He was still holding the wrench. "Mom?" "Yeah, baby." "Do you think Dad ever thinks about us?" The question caught her off guard. Cody almost never asked about his father, the man who'd left when the medical bills got too high and the future looked too hard. She'd spent years trying to protect him from that absence, filling the space with her own presence, hoping it would be enough. "I don't know," she said honestly, "but I know this. The people who show up are the ones who matter, not the ones who should have." Cody nodded slowly. He looked down at the wrench in his hands, then out at the road where the sound of engines still seemed to echo. "I think I want to be someone who shows up," he said. Denise pulled him close, and for a moment neither of them spoke. The dogwoods rustled in the breeze. Somewhere down the road, a truck shifted gears, heading north toward Joplin. The world kept moving, the way it always did, but something had settled into place. A boy had helped a stranger had kept his word, and a family had learned that kindness, once given freely, has a way of finding its way home.